I'm Christine Russo. Welcome to What Just Happened. Today we interview Matt Marcotte. Matt and I are going to talk about leadership. Welcome, Matt.
Hi, Christine Russo.
Welcome to What Just Happened.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Great. So give me a little brief history of your work that informed the book.
Oh, sure. Yeah, 34 years in either retail, consumer, or in technology that is customer facing. And, it's interesting, when I started writing the book, I had all these ideas about what I wanted to do and how I wanted to distill my philosophy on how you run brands and build brands and turn them around. And the more and more I was thinking about it, I realized the reason that any sort of framework or strategy worked was because every single person that worked with me on it really was committed to what we were trying to do. And that's partly because they were part of the building of it. They had agency, they had skin in the game, they had a voice, all those things. They were part of the process, but also they were all rowing in the same direction. So when I think back to, as Steve Jobs always says, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards. Looking backwards, I realized for me, I started out as a merchant and buying, but then very quickly you do a rotation, because you're an executive training program, you do a rotation into stores. And I remember from the very beginning, I had this boss, his name was Fred Moss, he was this old school buyer, and I was about to go into the rotation in stores, and I asked him for advice. And he said to me, your job is ultimately to do nothing. Now, when you tell a 22-year-old that, it sounds amazing, right? Sign me up for that. But what he really meant was that I had to teach everyone around me to do my job so that I could actually continue to do bigger, better work for the company and for my own career. And so that is, I'd say, is a start of where I really started to think about being a leader that is about development and about bringing people along and investing. And then when I was at Gap, it's interesting, Gap back in the day, I was there when we were the darlings of Wall Street back in the mid 90s. And I was also there when we lost our minds and we're going after the tween market. Remember them? Still remember it to this day, $90 disposable income is what they had every week. And so we walked away from our core customer. Anyway, so I was there during the heyday, but the company was an incredibly operationally efficient organization, probably the best in the industry at that time. But they really loved to lead by checklists. And I had such an allergy to checklists because checklists to me are about compliance, right? Like you have a scheduled visit, you go into a store, they know the answers to the test, they make the store look beautiful and perfect. You walk away feeling good about yourself because the store is what you want it to be. Then they go back to doing whatever they want to do because they were never actually committed to it to begin with. So my kind of way of working as I became like a regional and then zone VP and then led a reinvention project within the company was always around how do you build commitment? And commitment was about, once again, having people along the journey with you. And so Gap was very instrumental in that. And I also had this woman that I worked with. She was the head of merchandising, and she used to talk all the time about this idea of do the job that only you can do, which I love that phrase. Because I think as leaders, and you've probably seen this in your career, so many people work 1 to 2 levels down. They either work in areas where they're comfortable or they suppress the talent that they have, not necessarily intentionally. Whereas do the job that only you can do is really about this idea of what is it that me and my role, nobody else can do, and everything else that someone else can do, you delegate. You let them be part of the process. So that was like the Gap piece. And then I'll just go quickly. When I was at Apple, that was really amazing because I got there right after we had introduced the iPod to the PC consumer, which is when the business really exploded. I was there when we actually launched the iPhone and the iPad. So a lot of these huge product launches were creating like this hyper growth for Apple. And so Apple, if you're familiar, which everyone's familiar with Apple, but Apple wasn't just a product company, it was like a cultural organization. So you had to not only scale the business, but you had to scale the culture, and culture obviously comes through people. And so we went from 10,000 employees that reported to me to 25,000 in 3 years. And so the idea of adding that many people, you have to pick who you're adding very carefully and really be really clear about the kind of criteria, the hallmarks, the kind of competencies you're hiring for. So that idea of how you actually scale a culture through hypergrowth was a huge thing from Apple. And then when I went to Tory, that was a startup, essentially a privately held company, culturally based, founder-led, Apple was. And how do you take a company that is very much about a relationship with a founder, and it's also a clienteling based organization, and build these authentic, deep relationships where people felt like they were interacting with Tori or a version of Tori in every single touch point. So how you scale the humanity of a culture and how you did that at a relationship level was a huge part of that. And then when I went to Bergdorf, that was a 111-year-old, very valuable luxury retailer, even though it's a department store. But they had become stale, and the culture had gotten really toxic because we had forgotten how to build these relationships, both with our internal customer, to our employees, and then outwardly to very wealthy people. And I'm sure you can appreciate this. Wealthy people can pretty much buy whatever they want, but there's no premium, or there's on this idea of thoughtfulness. So this idea of how do you create this, we refer to as moments of joy, which is around connecting emotionally with your consumer by connecting emotionally and empowering your employees to do the same. And so all those things led me to this belief, or reinforced my belief, in that people are the product and human capital is my stock and trade as a leader. And so I'm a big one, as I said, for commitment versus compliance, and how you actually build cultures where people are part of it. And that's how you scale. And long-winded answer to your question, but that's how I got to where I am.
So one thing I picked up while you were speaking, and then you actually did refer to internal or fellow employees, coworkers, as Matt, your customer.
Absolutely.
So that's very interesting. I've never actually seen that perspective. All the focus is on the external customer. And to some degree, there's a lot that should be said about that. But maybe some of the ills that occur in retail are because you're looking through or around or over your first level of customer, which is the internal teams. In
100%.
I was an internal service department. I knew what my job was.
Yeah.
I had to make them happy. I built it and walked away. My question is that a general approach?
Yes.
And so again, even in D2C now, today, there's an obsessive focus on the customer. And I think to some degree, maybe they're overlooking a major piece of operational opportunity for success.
Yes. It's interesting. I was just having a conversation with a gentleman about an hour ago who came from the retail world and supply chain, strangely, when we were talking about the site. But he led a lot of teams. We were talking about this idea of, if you think about process and technology on the surface, seems easier. It's more black and white, right? When people are going to say, where are we putting our efforts? How are we leading or managing organizations? The people part's messy, right? The people part, because if I had 25,000 people in Apple that reported up through me, not obviously directly to me, that's 25,000 individual personalities. Now, the interesting thing is, if you actually think about what's easier, so I'll go back to the checklist mentality. It gives the people at the top, the people in charge, a false sense of security that everyone's doing the same thing. But what I have found is that compliance requires supervision. Because what you're saying is, I'm forcing you into a way of thinking or working or doing that may not be what you believe is the right way to run this business. But I'm not interested in what you have to say. I just want you to do the job. And the reality is that is not sustainable or scalable. And so what you have to do is make sure you have people who believe what you believe, right? That we all believe, say, like, that a customer experience should be transformational and not transactional. Just to give like a high level kind of comment, defining what transformational is really important, obviously, versus what transactional is, and getting people to be part of what could that look like? Given who the brand is, what we believe, what we're trying to accomplish, what our North Star is, how do we do that? And what you find is, when you actually get people involved, they have more ownership over the outcome. They have more skin in the game because they have a voice, they have agency. And so it's not actually harder in the long run. There's more upfront work around that. And you have to find the people that want to be part of it, and you have to go to separate the people who don't want to be part of it. And I had a phrase that was someone used years and years ago. It's, you don't got to be here, you get to be here. And so the idea of being super clear about what you're solving for, being super clear about the North Star, what we're trying to accomplish, allows people to be in choice of whether they see themselves in that or they don't. And then you create mechanisms that help people to find their way to other places if they don't see themselves there. And then you actually allow people to be part of the process if they do see themselves there. And what I have found is that as a leader, I am very rarely the person that has the best answer. I may actually have the right questions and the best questions, but the people around me are going to have even better answers. So my job as a leader is to create environments and cultures and frameworks and situations where other people can bring their best versus me having to have all the answers and being this top down, I know you do. It's more like, I see where we're going. Here's the end result. Here's the outcome. Here's the destination I think we need to get to. How do we think we should get there? And so you learn early on that, or I learned early on, that leveraging the collective brilliance of the people that work with you gets you much further than that kind of lone wolf approach.
How do you layer on a commission-based structure? So businesses down in luxury, they're
Yep.
commission-based, and other areas are also commission-based. But let's take luxury, because I was recently at a panel where it's a lot of talk about a lot of strategies. At the end of the day, it's hard to maintain motivation when your
Yep.
paycheck is smaller. It's harder to maintain camaraderie when you're fighting over fewer scraps. This is a major challenge. How, as a leader, do you approach that?
Yeah. Torrey was commission, Bergdorf was commission. So I've dealt with that in two very different organizations, but the similar. One is aspirational luxury, one full luxury. And then Apple, we made a decision not to be commission for the reasons, a little bit of what you were just talking about. We didn't want customers feeling like we were helping them because we were getting something out of it per se. But I will tell you, in the other two organizations, it's a really, threading a very kind of small needle. It's a very nuanced conversation. And what I mean by that is, you're trying to have people live in two worlds, like you said. Like, there's the individual, which is my commission. Like, my paycheck is based on the sales that I do. So you absolutely have to be cognizant of that and look for ways to create opportunities and environments where they can have the most opportunity to make a paycheck. So for example, at a corporate level, it might be how we are thinking about marketing, how we're thinking about what our rewards are for customers. It might be how we're actually creating events that bring customers in. It might be how we listen to the employees about what they need from tools and resources to do a better job clienteling. You start with that. And then you also think about the collective. So for example, when I was at Torrey, it became very clear to me very early on, and you'll appreciate this as a person who has store design and store, our stores in most malls were the top 3 productivity per square foot, it was like Hermes, a jeweler, and us, because our stores were so small. So what you just said earlier when we were talking about what section you get and what section you get and blah, blah. We couldn't really keep growing because if the average store does $300 to $500 a square foot and our stores were over $2,000 a square foot, you're tapped out without getting bigger. So clienteling became a bigger focus for us, where how do we sell to people who don't have to come into the stores? So in order for us to do that, we had to build a clienteling solution that would be helpful to our teams. So what we did was we had them help us build it, meaning what were the requirements they had, what was the functionality they needed, what were the things that were important. Like, we went so far as to have them bring their black binders and have all these Post-it notes and blah, blah, blah. And you know what I'm talking about, you've seen these, where they're like, so tell me how you use this. Tell me what you like, what you don't like. So they all became the representatives of those teams, became the architects of our clienteling solution. So all of a sudden the adoption is much better because they have built it themselves and we have listened to what they needed. So we're creating all of these inputs of, we're investing in you. We want you to figure out ways to work together. So one place where we did this, where it wasn't a commission moment, but it was a reinforcement of a way of working. You've heard of NPS, right? Net Promoter Score. So if you look at most companies, what they do is they have a top store and a bottom store, and everyone is trying to jones to get the best NPS score for customers. We flipped the script and said a well-run multi-unit organization should only have 2 to 5 points between the top performer and the bottom performer, because a customer travels to multiple stores. Why should they have one experience in Madison Avenue and another experience in South Coast Plaza? And so we created a learning environment so that there was no fear attached to not having great scores. But the learning environment was also, hey, Christine, you have the top score. You have the best NPS score, which means your level of service is phenomenal. Matt, you have the lowest. Matt, you better reach out to Christine to find out what she's doing. Oh, by the way, Christine, you need to make sure that you're reaching out to Matt to help him. And so this idea of creating this collective interdependence in places where it wasn't commission-based helped us to build a culture of collaboration. Now, collaboration doesn't happen everywhere, every day, every time, because there's a certain time when the commission sales is the commission sales. But if you're coming from a place of our natural landing point is to work together, and when we need to, we go off of that mountain individually, it changes the dynamic from we're always individual and every once in a while we work together. Does that make sense?
Yeah. How do you feel
Yeah.
technology as a partner, not a full-on blanket put in place and walk away, but how does technology possibly help?
I have a phrase that I use, which is technology isn't the experience. Technology is the enabler of the experience. And so I think it's incumbent upon leaders to understand that. So what they're investing in is actually amplifying what the human needs to or wants to do to be successful. And so I'll give you a perfect, very quick, small version of this from when we did the clienteling app. So do you remember, it still happens, but I think when Facebook was a bigger deal, when it was still like the 800-pound gorilla in social media, one of their kind of features is that in the morning when you open up your Facebook page, it tells you of your friends whose birthday it is today. Now, I would not have remembered 95% of those people's birthdays on my own. But because Facebook told me, it was a very quick 5-minute, oh my God, Christine, happy birthday. Now, you know that I got an algorithm like spit out. So it's not like you didn't know it came from Facebook. If you ever looked at the end of the day, people would post these, oh my God, thank you for the love. I feel so special. So the technology enabled a human connection moment, right?
Yeah.
So technology can help to further human connection if it's done the right way. So for example, in our clienteling book, we knew that relationships with our clients were really important. So one of the features that we put in was the same technology, when I say simple, so super simple coding, but the same feature as Facebook, which is that it was 5 days before the client's birthday, it would pop up on your calendar that is going to be Christine's birthday. And the reason we did 5 days, it gave you time to go get a card. And if you wanted to old school mail it, it gave you 3 days to mail it. If you wanted to send an email, we get a reminder the day of the birthday. The point is, it took the stupid work out of Christine's way so Christine could actually get credit for the birthday, have a moment where she's building more bonds, more relationship, deeper connections with the consumer. And that's just a very simple, low brow, low code kind of piece of technology. But the filter that we used for technology was, does it help us to be more human? Does it help us to create more connection, to build relationships? So we had filters of what things we would put in and what things we wouldn't, because some of them are tricky technology where it doesn't really, like, you would love this. I don't know. Maybe you love this idea. I don't know. Remember the days of the magic mirror?
Yes, of course.
In every dressing room.
Yes,
it
of
was
course. They
were never updated, but everyone loved the idea because it was a PR moment. But I refer to that as tricky technology. It didn't really solve a problem that a consumer really had. It didn't really help an employee to build a different experience. It was just one of those built in an ivory tower moments where it seemed cool, but it really didn't have any application. And that's why they don't last.
I completely agree. Yeah. During that time period that you actually mentioned, it was pre-digital transformation. So it was just tech sort of exploration. If you think about what was happening, it was, wow, the internet's really cool. What's happening on the internet that we can maybe bring into stores because maybe it's a threat. I don't know. Okay, let's press screens inside stores. It's like,
Yeah.
what are you talking about? My
So
God.
here's another piece, and you will love this, given the world that you lived in. When we were building flagship stores, this is what, 2000, I guess, probably 13, 14. And to your point, video is becoming everyone loved the video because a runway and everyone had the video. And so there was a conversation about putting a TV screen in this flagship. And I was so against it for one reason. I wasn't against the idea. I was like, okay, let's talk about execution. So now we're gonna have a screen that requires an investment of continuous content that gets built. So what happens when we don't have money for content is the screen is either dark or has that weird Pong thing that just keeps going because it's broken. So what we did was and you remember these from the back in the day, we put screens in that looked like mirrors when they weren't used. So at least it felt residential and guess what? 90% of the time, they weren't used. But that leads me to a different point, which is anytime someone's going to invest in something or someone, you have to think 6 months, a year, 18 months down the road of how this is going to play out versus in the moment, we get excited by the bright, shiny object. We don't actually think about how it's going to actually work over time.
Yeah, no, the big pushback was always content. It was whatever CapEx expenditure you had that maybe was like up for debate to put something in a store. Maybe you got past it. You had pros, you had cons, you had champions, detractors. You got it in. And then marketing was like, we don't have the money for this. They won't give us the budget.
Exactly.
We can't shoot content. That runway show's from 3 seasons ago. The customer comes in and says, oh, I want that dress. 3 seasons ago, you have spring running when it's fall, you have fall running when those were very challenging.
What's interesting to that point, and it goes a little bit back to when you were talking about this idea of commitment versus compliance, or kind of how I've been leading. The other part, and this is when you run stores, you are the stakeholder to every department because everything lands in the store. So you become very conscious of connectivity between departments. And so what you just said is a perfect example of the people that were doing the technology of the screen, or whoever made the decision about the screen, didn't really align with the marketing department, who had to figure out, are we able to have this budget? Blah, blah. And so I always talk about this idea and this, how do you make sure that behavior is aligned with structure? And
Oh,
the
honey,
best,
I have a lot to say about that.
please do.
I don't know if it'll end up in the show, but I have my sort of bird's eye view, fly on the wall is the structure inside retail, even to this day, is antiquated because it's solely based on the flow of product. The design, the merchandising, the productions, the allocation, the support of selling of product. That's not the world we live in anymore. So I have these incredible blow it up, start again. Here's one crazy lofty idea is to reallocate the entire organization based on the 5 senses. So you have your sight team, your smell team, your touch team, your taste team, whatever. And believe it or not, each of those departments fit neatly in those areas. Because if you work backwards from the customer, they shop by senses.
Yeah.
They don't shop by this was made in Guangzhou. So we're going to set up our whole company to make sure we have a Guangzhou management. But if you're in the touch team, that's the product. So those people are thinking all day long about what is this going to feel like for the customer? Price value, what's the fabrication, can we afford it? Do we need to go down? Do we need to go up, etc. And I have other crazy ideas that these would never happen, but it really maniacally put the customer in a physical store, leave digital to the side.
Well, digital has its own version of that, right? Because it doesn't have all the 5 senses. So the ones it does have, you have to really think about how you're activating those and compensating for the ones that aren't. No,
right.
I think
if you're a candle company, how do you connect with the customer? This is something I think about. Why? I don't know. I love candles.
No, but I think here's what I would tell you. I think so. One of the hallmarks, or one of the models that are in my book, and it's based on something I've been doing for years, is the way you have to think about both the internal customer and the external customer is through a filter of heart, head, hands, which is what I feel, what I think, and what I do. Now, what's interesting, Christine, is if you actually Google those 3 words in that order, it will reorder the words to head, heart, hand, because most companies think strategy first, that hopefully creates some sort of emotional reaction that then leads to, that's not how humans are built. Humans are built to feel things first, right? So when you talk about 5 senses, it's a perfect analogy. Senses are feeling. You then make some sort of like sense of what you're experiencing, which is the strategic, like, what do I do with this? And then you decide what you do, which is the kind of action piece of it. And I think so many companies have taken a more intellectual, strategic approach that they've lost the understanding of the human condition and how you get people bought in and brought on board is through that kind of part of your brain which makes decisions based on how you feel or your gut, not by if you're familiar with Simon Sinek, he has this quote in one of his books where I just love it. He goes, Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I have a dream, not I have a plan."
Yes, I know it. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And it's such a great like little soundbite because it is a very different way that you think about the world. So to your point, how you organize your companies, how you organize your internal systems or your internal strategy, how you think about your external experiences is very different. When I was at Gap, the last 2 years I was there was it was a reinvention because our business had gone from being the darlings of Wall Street to like the -40 comp every single day. We had gone after some things we shouldn't go after. Anyway, so when we were rebuilding the company, it was all based on psychographics. How do consumers see us versus demographics, right? Which is how much money somebody makes, which doesn't tell you anything about the person. But what we found was, and this goes to your point earlier, I think it's just reinforcing that this is a good idea. What you're talking about is when the male archetypes and female archetype shoppers shop differently. So men, when they shop, two things. They're procurement shoppers. They find a shirt they like, they buy 5 of them, they don't see them again for a year, right? Women, it's more of a discovery, it's more social. So salespeople, men judge salespeople based on their actual information credibility, meaning this jacket can go to -30 degrees Celsius because it has dual loft and blah, blah, whatever. Now, most people are never going to go to that cold, but a guy can go to a bar and say, this jacket I bought, it can blah, blah, blah. So they judge the credibility of the salesperson by what they know information-wise. Women, this is archetypes, remember, not everyone's built the same way, it's more social, so they'll find out together. It's a relational, let's go find out what this is. It's more of the connection for them. So we had to build our business model for male shoppers and female shoppers and how we set up the store, how we trained our people. Like you will love this, especially as someone who deals with stores. So remember in Gap, old days Gap, they had the denim wall in the back. There was a period of time where we were going after khaki. So the khaki wall is on the side, the denim wall is in the back. We went through a period, we shifted and put the khaki wall in the back and the denim wall on the side. Men would come into the store and be like, you don't sell denim anymore? Because they couldn't see it. Because they were literally so used to it being where it was and they wanted it where it was that certain shifts affected how they felt about the brand. So we had to understand all of those things about a consumer and then organize ourselves around them.
Of course, we always put the men's department in front because they didn't want to walk through the women. They didn't want to be near women's product. They wanted to be near the selling process in a women's department. So it was always men's in front, fewer fitting rooms. They're not trying on, they're doing that. It's either a repeat buy or I'll bring it home and I'll try it on kind of thing. And it'll be fine. It's fine buying.
Yeah.
And then women's in the back and more fitting rooms, etc.
So now the thing we just talked, which is the external consumer, to go back to your original question, original statement. Now imagine this is what we apply to our internal customer. We're always thinking.
Actually, I can't imagine that. You're going to have to walk me through it because I don't get it. Explain.
But it's the same question. It's the same question of what is it that our people need? What do we want from them? And what do we need from them? And what do they need from us? It's a dialogue and a partnership and a relationship. If we treat employees like a means to an end, like essentially just like they're disposable and they're just a task or a tactic, then you're dead in the water. Because think about yourself. If you've never seen something or you've never been treated a certain way, why would you treat others that way? And so you've got to actually, if you expect something from someone, you have to invest the same quote unquote things in them. And I think what you were saying at the beginning is that so many brands, most brands, leapfrog over the internal customer to focus on the external customer without realizing it's the internal customer that's creating the experience for the external customer. Absolutely. Whether that's corporate, whether that's stores, whether it's e-commerce, whether it's product, everyone has to be organized around what we're solving for, our North Star, but we have to invest in our greatest asset, which is our employees. And I think over time that has become less and less prevalent. in most companies.
Let's be real. Retail is a lot of people come into retail thinking it's a lot of fun and I'm going to sell things. It is a high stakes, high pressure. It used to
Yep.
be very mean by management, very aggressive, a very hard place to work.
Mhm.
Expectations are very hard. It can be a mindset shift for someone new to retail to say, oh, when I shop, it seems like so much fun. But now that you work here, it's a business. There are
Yep.
goals to be made. The pressure on individual stores down to daily goals, weekly goals, etc., where most of the pumping up behind on the chalkboard is, hey guys, let's do it. Let's do it. Goal today. How much time is really spent understanding the human customer that works there versus you're going to love it here because we made goal. I'm
I
pulling
mean,
the
here's what I say, it's a choice. And I don't need to simplify this, but it's a choice of every leader. And my belief is that you manage process and you lead people. And I think we have reversed that. We don't lead process. And so there are things that have to be done, but that's management. Leadership is, and there's a quote that I love, which is the challenges of leadership are emotional and conversational, not rational and tactical. So if you're trying to bring people along by actually just yelling louder about the task, that doesn't change anything. And there's no question retail is hard. But I worked for a technology company for 3.5 years, and the sales organization, they make what happens in retail look easy from the pressure they have to actually close deals. And also every single organization, every single company has challenges if you're dealing with people. The question is, how do you view people? Do you view them as your secret sauce, or are they in the way of the secret sauce? So I know one of the things I had written about on LinkedIn, and I know you and I wanted to talk about this, was this idea of culture. And what I had written about.
Before we get to culture, I want to
Sure.
sneak in a point here because I want to talk about that leadership and the approach.
Sure.
Because one of the, for sure, seemingly, I don't know that we're ringing the bell that it's a huge success yet, but it certainly seems on the right track, is Richard Dixon at Gap. Now, when he first started, I was like, what is the CEO doing taking selfies with every single sales associate and processing and this factory and there and that? I was like, what is he doing? He's so cringe. He's amazing. He is connected with every department and every person. They feel seen and heard and really invested in why it's better to be better, to have a better performing business. You want to enjoy your work? Watch a baseball game. The team that is like leading the division, they're dancing in the dugout. They have handshakes. They're having fun. They're doing water. The team that's used to be leading the division and no longer is, hi, New York Mets, I hate you. They're no longer dancing. It's a grind. They want it. But it's not like you dance your way to the top. Now you're in the lower and you're chasing. You're always dancing at the top. So he conveyed, let's get to the top and dance, metaphorically. I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, here's what I say. I think there are a lot of people, myself included, who have a soft spot for Gap because we worked there, or we remember it back in the day. And so there's a general desire to see them succeed, right? So when things get better, you're like, this is wonderful. I agree. What I think he has brought to the company, or what his tenure with the people he's brought in with him, is they've reestablished some relevancy in the marketplace. They've created buzz. They've gone back to some of the old drawing boards, like that denim commercial that just came out now is very reminiscent of what happened to everybody in denim, every khaki, which, by the way, speaks to just part of the culture of the company. I've seen some images from some of their leadership conferences and the slides and what's on the slides. And I got to tell you, I'm like, I hope this is true because it really speaks to the culture again. So I agree. I think that there's a lot of wind in their sails right now. The question will become, What's fundamentally changed in the way they run the business that can sustain itself over time? That's not a criticism that's just more of, I'm curious to see, because anyone can have a good quarter. Anyone can have a good year. And if you've lived in retail long enough, every brand that doesn't go out of business, it's like a roller coaster. Today, the peacock, tomorrow, the feather duster, then they rise from the ashes. So all these brands have their moments. And so what I think changes that is to what you were saying about the connectivity of, do you get everyone that works with you, both internally, externally, moving in the same direction? And how do you do that? And so that remains to be seen. I will tell you that what I've seen so far is very encouraging, and I absolutely want them to succeed.
I've had this discussion with marketers from the retail space about when a new CEO comes in with a branded improvement plan, Burberry Forward, Mulberry, this one, that. And it's very difficult for people who have worked there for a long time to say, wow, this guy's really different, because usually there's a couple of different tries when you're in that downward. This is the one that's going to get us out of it. I believe this one. So it's never just the pitch of the plan. The second job of the CEO or the leadership that he insulates himself with or surrounds himself with, he or she shouldn't necessarily be insulated, is we're going to prove to you, our first customer, the people who work here, why this is better for you, for all of us. That's a really tough job. That's why
it is.
The leadership is very difficult.
Yeah. So here's something that I would say to that. Agreed, first of all. When I am actually working with teams, both when I was running companies and now when I'm advising them, the first step is to say, what is our vision? What is the promised land, the North Star, the kind of the end destination, what's Nirvana look like? The second piece, which is the harder part for companies, is where are you starting from? Because the distance between where you want to go and where you're starting from, that's all the work. And a lot of times people come into companies, like you said, with this kind of branded, here's what we're doing. And people are like, okay, but do you know where we're tripping up right now? Do you know what reality actually looks like for us? And that level of discovery is not always done. So I'll give you an example. When I went to Bergdorf, and like I said, there were some challenges, let's just say. And the great thing about Bergdorf was that it was about 1,200 employees, but they're all in the same box or the same general area. So I was a COO of the company. This may not sound like this was my job, but it was, because my job is to actually figure out how to build a strategy to move forward. And so what I did was I took the first 3 months of my job and I met with every single employee in groups of 10 to do focus groups, meaning tell me, teach me, help me learn. What's challenging, what's working, what's not. And a lot of these people had tenure. They remember it back when it was everyone's favorite store. The grandmother, the mother, the daughter, they're all shopping there together. So there's a lot of historical knowledge and a lot of amazing intelligence and insight. But it also helped me understand where the challenges were, but also because I met with 1,200 people, I saw the themes. And so the idea was, okay, I know where we want to go, but I need to understand super clearly where we're starting from, because if I don't know that, we will do the wrong things. We will make the wrong decisions, the wrong investments. We'll think we're further along than we are, blah, blah. But what it also did was it actually helped people understand that I was listening, that I was curious, that I was interested in, and I was, because they have the answers. So we had this thing that I would do every week after these called, you said, we heard, we did. And it was a summary of all the conversation we had. So everyone in the entire company would hear what we were talking about, transparency. We would say, okay, based on what you said, this is what we're seeing as the theme. So they allowed them to be like, is this right? Did I get this right? Not right? And then based on what you told us, this is what we did. So I'll give you a perfect example. I feel like there's so many great examples back to store design, which your ballywick. One of the very first things people told us was lights were out. Not 2, Christine, 500. In a luxury department store, 500 lights were out on the sales floor. And it was one of those things that people were like, I can't be proud of this place because it's right. So within 2 weeks, we replaced all the lights. A, they were listened to. B, it was fixed. It should have been fixed. And C, it built trust because now all of a sudden we're following through. So there are things you do to build relationship. But the first thing is you've got to go from not only where you want to go, but where are you starting from? And then how do we all work together to move in that direction. And that allowed us, things like that allowed us to turn that culture back around to what it should have been in the first place.
Being seen, being heard, being listened to, a huge component of managing and building retail, especially
Yep.
physical retail. I'd like your thoughts on culture versus performance and the debate that is happening and a changing shift from workplace to workplace. What's happening out there? What are you seeing? And how do people feel seen and heard in this current kind of macro environment?
I think it's such an important question. I posted something a couple weeks ago. The CEO of AT&T made a comment that company culture is no longer about loyalty, tenure, family. It's about performance. And I don't know this gentleman. I don't know what they've been up against, so I don't want to read too much into it. But on the surface, it just reads like someone who doesn't understand culture. Because what we've done in the world is we've created this false dichotomy between culture and performance. And every culture that I've ever built and every culture that I've been part of as an architect has been about performance. Because what culture is how you achieve the results, how you actually express the brand, how you actually create these experiences that actually create participation and loyalty and profit. And so when people talk about them as two separate things, then I have to question how they've been using culture to fuel the company. So for example, I think a lot of people are talking about this work from home culture, that everyone's showing up in their sweatpants, this one's nursing a baby on like they're not doing other work. And then you hear, now this happened to me when I was at Salesforce, is that all the companies were starting to say, we need people in offices more. And so now it's 3 days a week in the office. And by the way, having run decentralized teams my whole life, I understand the power of being together. There are certain things you can do together that you just can't do when you're separate. But what I found was, okay, so everyone goes back to the office and everyone's literally doing the exact same thing they would have done at home. They're all in corners on computers with clients, not talking to people, not creating, not collaborating, not being innovative. Because what happens is the company's not, as I said earlier, they're not thinking through this idea all the way through, meaning being intentional and deliberate of what happens in the office when you get there. And so this idea of culture is actually the fuel for performance. It's not an inhibitor of performance. And so I think companies need to really ask themselves, how do they view culture as a performance driver, not culture versus performance? Does that make sense?
Yes, and there are personalities and waves of what's popular in the greater business landscape. I remind you of Six Sigma, Mr. Welsh and GE. And we have, even before that, the work till you die at American companies, at IBM, and the loyalty there, and the way that business is woven into the human landscape. And I would say that not just in business, but in the greater landscape, we are leaving a compassionate approach to things where it's, tell me, I'm listening. Okay, let's figure this out, to here are the rules. This is how you comply because I said so.
Yes.
Parenting style 1970, how I grew up. I don't want to do that. Why? Because I said so. That's it. Gentle parenting in business is leaving. And so we're going to start seeing more of that.
Yeah. So I want to comment. I don't consider culture gentle parenting. I consider culture, I will tell you, if you ask anybody that's worked for me, I'm tough. I have high standards and I absolutely expect incredible performance. But I've created cultures with my teams where people feel valued and seen and part of the process. They also are held to a high standard because we're super clear about what's expected. And I think when you treat people like adults and invest in them, the right ones invest back in you, and the other ones, you get to see who they are and you move on them quickly. Cultures have the ability to move people because, like we said before, people want meaning and purpose, right? If you think about statistically, what, 60%, 70% of people hate their jobs. You don't think that actually impacts productivity? You don't think that impacts results? You don't think that impacts someone's willingness to go above and beyond? In today's world, we need people to be able to really invest themselves, which means we have to invest in them. And you said something earlier, generationally, those triggers, those carrots, those investments, those important things that are important are different for Gen Z and Gen A and Gen Y than they were for Gen X and boomers. But you can still get incredible performance. You just have to go about it with the employee in mind.
This occurred to me a couple days ago. I'm like, what is going on here? There's a new, we're seeing staid businesses and governments take on a tech startup mentality of move fast and break things, and moving much faster. Seeing it in our government.
Yep.
And ask the questions later. And by the way, rules don't apply. And that's the tech startup rule book and playbook that got them where they are today in terms of the big guys. And it's still in play. And that, so to me, to see AT&T and John Stankey, the CEO, write a letter like that's a repositioning of his culture, right or wrong. Let's go back to your comments. He doesn't get it. This is the culture now. Like you said, this is our culture now. Not everyone's going to want to stay. We're not going to want everyone to stay.
It's always been that. This is nothing new. This is actually nothing new.
We want to take AT&T, which has moved very slowly and the stock languished, and now it's doing better. And we want to apply new rules so we can move fast and break things. And here's how we're going to go about doing it. Again, right or wrong. Maybe in the long term, wrong, because they're not taking the human.
And I said, I don't know enough about what's happening under the covers. Like I said, that's why I was like, if I just take it on the surface level, when you make a comment like that, what you're saying, the way you're positioning yourself is that culture is not about performance. That if you actually simplify that sentence, that is what you leave with. And what I am saying is that cultures of performance, like anything else, are a choice, but they're not mutually exclusive things. And I think people in times of frustration look to, the reason we're not doing well is because we're being too nice to people. We're not pushing them hard enough. That may be true actually for your particular organization because of how you've decided to organize yourself or operate as a business. But don't conflate that with the idea that culture and performance don't go together. That is what I think is dangerous, because really, like I said, just to repeat myself, sorry to do that again, but like I built businesses from $1 billion to $6 billion, from $69 million to $800 million. Like we've had the highest NPS scores, we have the highest retention rates. I could point to a lot of metrics that would actually back up what I'm saying, but I think at the bottom line is, if you work in organizations where people are involved, you have to be in service to those people in order to drive your results. And that is the part that I think people have outsourced or forgotten, that until AI takes over everything and no one's around anymore, people are the product. And so we have to figure out how to motivate them in ways that are sustainable, scalable, and profitable, but also give them meaning and agency and a desire to do more than what's expected.
So you have a book coming out. Why did you write the book and when is it coming out?
Yes, the book is called Built on Belief: Why Cultures of Commitment Are the Competitive Advantage. And so as we talked today, it's really built off of my 34 years of running brands, building brands, turning around brands, and realizing that the secret sauce was these cultures of commitment where the people that I worked with, that worked in my organization, were all part of the bigger idea. They were part of the plan, part of the strategy. They had a voice and agency, all things we've talked about. And it's interesting, I think I had these frameworks that are in the book, but as I was looking at the frameworks in isolation, I was like, what makes these any different than any other person who creates a framework or a model or whatever? And I realized what made them different, at least for me, in their success, was because of the people that actually built them and executed on them. And so really the secret sauce wasn't the framework, it was the engine that drove the framework. And That to me is why I built it, because I think so much of, like we were talking about, so much of business, forget the industry, is compliance driven and has a lowest common denominator approach, especially to their internal customers, to the employees. And I just believe that we need to flip the script and really challenge people to, what does your brand believe? What does your brand believe about your people, about your customer, and how are you organizing yourself to deliver better results, more sustainable and scalable results through this idea of translating passion into commitment that drives more success. So that's why I decided to write it. And it's coming out September 30th.
Sounds great, Matt. Thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed this, and I've enjoyed getting to know you.
Yeah, me too. And I'm going to see each other in Miami now.
Yeah, for sure. And that is what just happened. I'm Christine Russo.